Daniel's here. Correctivity and Homeostasis. Systemic autonomy of European genus and species. Okay, this seems to be a good time for a show. This will be 11 o'clock at night in London. It's 6 o'clock in New York. 5 o'clock in Chicago. 4 o'clock in Denver. And 3 o'clock in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Now then, I think it's time for us to take a step back from what's happening in Ukraine. Here particularly not to react. I'm thinking back to begin with of a meme that was originally very appealing that came through my Twitter feed of a pretty blonde, I guess Ukrainian woman, holding up a sign saying that if Russia backs out of the war, there will be no war. If Ukraine backs out of the war, there will be no Ukraine. And originally, that appealed to the gung ho nationalist in me. And I am certainly, like anybody with any sort of decency and intelligence, moved by the worldwide support of nationalism, of Ukrainian nationalism, ethno-nationalism, really, as it should be. However, I had to take a step back from that and realize that this was a disastrous premise. And potentially worse, potentially catastrophic in the way that it could escalate. Moreover, needless, the improper strategy to take on this. And surprisingly, some very prominent scholars in discussion of international relations are getting this wrong. I'm thinking of Kotkin. I believe his first name is Stephen Kotkin, the Princeton scholar. He's written a lot about World War II and its causes and so on. And Mearsheimer. Perhaps not as surprising that these sorts are getting it wrong as they would, with their motives being what they are. Is that WN, some seem to be oblivious to this. I'll mention some names in a moment. But I want to get to the fundamental position and why I was like I want to be clear, to take a step back from supporting straightforward, conventional battle on the part of the Ukrainians. And that is I don't like the chances of them succeeding in any sense without vast destruction and vast carnage. And even in that attempt, they're not likely to succeed. It's not likely to result in anything but what Russia is setting out to do at this point. Unless, of course, you want to drag NATO into it and the West and other nations, and which is, of course, the greatest risk of all. What makes me so sure that it's now, I'm not saying that Ukrainians and those who support Ukrainian ethno-nationalism shouldn't fight in a way, resistance and I'll go so far as to say that even those who are, just willing to die, of their own accord. Okay, I mean, if they're that passionate about it and they're willing to sacrifice their lives, go for it. But don't put at risk those who want to do the right thing at this point, which is to take the long strategy, to fight for the long haul. And this is where, by the way, where I found what Coach Red Pill was saying so offensive, maybe disgusted with his very face and the confidence, the arrogance of this man. He's been there in Kiev and saying that, the Russians are winning and they're going to win, and well, even if the Russians, quote, win, this hot war in the short term, are they winning? If they take over Ukraine, is Putin winning? Is he gonna achieve a satisfactory victory in the world's eyes, in the eyes of Ukraine? I would say no. And furthermore, the definition of winning that Coach Red Pill was going by is dubious altogether. And it's why he's delimiting it is the point. I'm thinking in terms of Belarus. That's a place that I've been to several times, 6-7 times. I've spent months there, weeks there. And I've talked to Belarusian nationalists who know what's going on with Lukashenko. I've met even with the first president of Belarus, who actually Shishkevich, who actually signed drafted and signed the dissolution of the Soviet Union, along with Yeltsin and the Ukrainian president, who was after a brief time of freedom from like 1991 to 93, he was the president. He was a true Belarusian patriot and nationalist, wanted the Belarusian language and the best for the Belarusian people, and didn't trust Russia. Their experience was, trying to get away to achieve autonomy for Belarus. But he was deposed by the puppet Lukashenko as of 1993, and Lukashenko has been in there with fake staged elections ever since. Here's my point. Brutal as Lukashenko has been in maintaining his control, his proxy control for Russia, of course, over Belarus. And he's apparently killed at least 10 and upwards of 25 oppositional figures. I've talked to people who have been beaten for hours for protesting elections, people who tried to run alternative press there, so on. It's a situation where if you get caught with with a joint or a marijuana cigarette, you can go to jail for like 7 years and into a hideous prison system. There's a lot bad about it. On the other hand, the Belarusian people survive. The language is still surviving, though Russian is pretty much imposed. Russians are like about 11% of the population. Belarusians are about 80-something%. My point is this, is that they're, as a people, they're surviving under this Russian puppet regime. And they have the capacity, and they do, to fight for their autonomy as a sovereign people, distinct from Russia, another day, and we who care, might add, and distinct from Western nations as well, not to have their liberal panmixia imposed. It's part of the point, in a perverted sort of way, just like the Iron Curtain protected some of the ethnies of Eastern Europe from Western liberalism. Again, that's not to condone Russia, especially when Russian control over Belarus, especially when you look upon the history and the millions of Belarusian patriots murdered, such that you don't even know, the audience doesn't even know that this is a very different people from Russians. a whole different nation, a whole different people. You don't even know. You think, oh, they're the same thing as Russians. They're just, different location. So that's no, that's of course terrible. But nevertheless, even though this difference is there are forces that are trying to wipe it out, it hasn't happened. So what I'm saying is this: for Ukraine, this model not only holds up, but even more. There's an even more encouraging side to it, because well, we can believe that Putin wants to depose Zelensky and install a puppet for Russia, one who is Russian sympathetic. Now, if the Ukrainians and the supporters, as ethno-nationalists, were to back off a bit from the concept of hot war and humor that for a time, this would be a far better strategy. First of all, Zelensky is not Ukrainian, and he was put under basically the broad scope of Operation Clean Break project for a new American century. So this is the first place where this is one of the places where Joel Stephen Kotkin is showing his colors by saying that this man's a great hero. Man's not a great hero in calling upon people to engage in this hot war with Putin. He's bringing disaster upon his people, calling for a no-fly zone, which would mean NATO. He's going to have cities destroyed, many people killed, and not likely to win, right? They say war is a YKW harvest. Well, there you go. And they're trying for that harvest. And that's just, the first, problem with there's Kotkin anyway. That's just the first problem with Kotkin's angle. So the point is that they could have a puppet like Lukashenko in Belarus, and he's going to be didactic. The patriots even are going to hate him. The world is going to hate him. They're going to see how fake it is, how tyrannical this imposition is, and they can support the Ukrainians in adopting a long strategy of ethno-nationalism to depose him, if not eventually to transform the Ukraine into their rightful ethno-state. Fight, but not particularly, not quite so directly as to get yourself killed. Not even necessarily guerrilla tactics. Again, if people want to do that, if they want to sacrifice their lives, okay. I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to emasculate the Ukrainian nationalists, but the idea of fighting a hot war in hopes of a quicker victory is clearly not the best strategy. So I suggest that Ukrainians back off the idea of hot war fighting. Not exactly acquiesce to Russian in a puppet regime, but take the long view. And here's where I want to differ from Coach Red Pill again. When he says, victory, what is victory? Would that be a victory for Russia? Not exactly. It's going to make Putin more hated. It's going to make this puppet hated. It's going to lend stronger warrant to Ukrainian ethno-nationalism and allow them to achieve, put them on a course to achieve the long-term victory, the real victory, over Russia, over the stupid ideas of, a pig like Coach Red Pill. Now, okay, so I feel very important to emphasize that as my position, because I've had some knee-jerk reactions to this all. It's very upsetting to me that these European peoples are at war and killing each other like this. And I do believe that actors at the meta level are largely responsible for this. We'll talk about that in a moment. In a sense, Stephen Kotkin, I think it's Stephen Kotkin, would be one of those conceiving things at the meta level, saying that he uses the word correctivity as well, as I do, which is basically derived from the American pragmatists, and it goes to the idea that, as the pragmatists would do it, and Dewey and others, in really an extreme form of the franchise that democracy would, provides for correction of systemic errors. Now, Kotkin's saying that's why America is so wonderful, and that's why we're so powerful, and we're going to win, and well, I think that, maybe Kotkin and his tribe think America is so wonderful the way it is. Most normal people think that, and caring people about our species think that America is pretty disastrous. And there's a reason for that this, the tribes weaponizing of Deweyan pragmatism, where you're extending the franchise indefinitely, even to people who aren't citizens, right? That is not exactly correctivity there. That is runaway. In fact, that is runaway. And this is what Kotkin thinks. It might indeed be more and more powerful as it expands beyond the borders. This monster, universal democracy, I guess. Pretty much that's the trajectory. But that's not what I'm talking about, and that's not what ethno-nationalists are talking about when they talk about systemic corrective. There is like something like a democratic asset it's something like a democratic corrective process, but it's not just everybody. Obviously, it's limited to people of a certain age and who are constrained by certain rules. With the most important being that your nation has, your biology has borders and boundaries. That's not up for vote. And then you can begin talking about the kind of strange quantitative process of voting altogether, and it becomes it takes on a different form of discussion and working things out in specificatory structures. But that's okay. Let's put that aside. So Kotkin's abusing this idea of correctivity and why and how it makes America powerful and how that's supposed to be good. and he calls Zelensky a great hero. He said, Kotkin said that, a few weeks ago, Zelensky had a very small approval rating. Now he's got a 95% approval rating. Well, he shouldn't. Calling upon a hot war like this is extreme incompetence on the part of Zelensky, and well, he is not even. He calls himself Ukrainian, but he's not even. He's a member of the tribe, and he was installed there by what's his name? By Ihor Kolomoisky. Andrew Joyce over at TOO did a good piece on that. And it's part of the Operation Clean Bake project, Victoria Newland and her husband Robert Kagan, who was author thereof. That's something I want to be clear about too. People who want to blame America per se in all this, well, it's a hijacked America, and it takes. I'm not saying that there's not two components that you're talking about this position now. We don't only blame the tribal folks. We recognize that they need traitors from our ilk, and which you have, of course. Apparently, I haven't. To be honest, I haven't verified this, but I don't have reason to doubt it. John Kerry's kid is working for the gas companies involved with the Ukraine. Now, he's a tribal member, so he doesn't count, or he counts as a tribal. But obviously, everybody knows that Biden's son Hunter has been getting his $83,000 a month to work for the gas companies. Nancy Pelosi apparently is a kid working for the companies, and Mitt Romney apparently is a kid working for the gas companies in Ukraine. So they're taking the payoff, and they bear responsibility for this mess as well. Okay. So we don't don't like. We're surprised. So Kotkin's take on this is surprisingly bad. And then there's Mearsheimer, who's getting big approval from Joel Davis, naturally. Even Kevin McDonald seems to be unaware somehow of the long-term implications being discussed by and wishes being discussed by Mearsheimer, who's is kosher, and Kevin McDonald's largely the expert on that, on their group evolutionary strategy. Well, there were other people who were approving of Mearsheimer too. I forget a couple other. I was listening to a couple other WN who were approving somehow of Mearsheimer. Some of these come in largely when people are blaming America and saying and sort of almost justifying Putin and what they're doing. They seem to approve of someone, even if they are kosher, which is nuts. First of all, I want to be clear that I don't grant Putin any real excuse for this. He didn't have to do this, and it's horrific. But Mearsheimer talks a lot about power politics, and the international situation is one of might makes right and not of rights and so on. Well, anyway, there are rules that can be agreed upon between nations, which would offset the notion of might makes right. But I want to quote exactly something that Mearsheimer said in this video that McDonald posted and others have referenced. Mearsheimer says, quote, and this is in a discussion, "Why is Ukraine the West's fault?" featuring John Mearsheimer. Mearsheimer says, 50 at timestamp 52 minutes and 54 seconds. If you talk to most people who study Europe today and spend lots of time over there, they're quite pessimistic about where Europe is headed, not only regarding Eastern Europe, but also with regard to Western Europe. And I'm not sure in 25 years what it will all look like. I mean, in my opinion, the biggest issue is demographic, and that Europeans have not been making lots of babies for a long time, and as a result, they're going to have to import lots of people. He's saying that he's making this, ridiculous assumption that we have to import lots of people if we don't have enough babies. And these are countries that do not have a rich history. He even uses these obnoxious terms of integrating people. Like you want to integrate people from the rest of the world. Like that's a rich thing to do, to destroy your genome in a smooth way. Much the way the United States does. Oh, thank you. And it's no accident that you that now you are beginning to see the rise of, quote, far-right parties all across Europe because of all of the immigration. So one could paint, I'm quoting Mearsheimer here, so one could paint a pretty bleak picture about Europe's future. Now, this is terrible that people would react to their genome, to their species being destroyed by immigration and integration. And then he says, but the counter to that would be, we've got all those countries like Romania, like the Czech Republic, like Slovakia, embedded in these institutions that will go to great lengths to combat those tendencies. In other words, to combat ethno-nationalism, to combat your survival as European peoples, distinct as genus and species. This is what Mearsheimer's into. And this is what Joel Davis is applauding, even well, McDonald's not saying anything against this, or he should. And in a more incremental way, this will facilitate the spread of liberal democracy and capitalism. Oh, God. Mearsheimer. It's right up there with Gottfried. It's people you just have to shake your head when white nationalists approve of this. Okay. The next great scholar that we'll address. I know. It's not that Kotkin and Mearsheimer don't have good things to say, that you can pluck out something. You can. Kotkin, I wish I could remember it exactly. In that same speech, articulated very well why it is that Putin doesn't have to go, or how it's not legitimate that he go to war, and how he doesn't have to. But let's just leave it for now to say that he doesn't have to, and it's not legitimate to attack a sovereign nation in the eyes of the sane world. Use your imagination and do your research as to why that might be. The other great scholar who kind of showed his hand interestingly, said I'm being a bit facetious, but he is quite intelligent, and he's a professor at Yale. I'm talking now about Timothy Snyder. He's a historical expert on these Eastern European nations in particular, and the conflicts that have gone on here historically, and with particular focus on World War II, but having a lot to say about what's going on now. But he's appearing on Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. That alone should tell you something. I think isn't Amy Goodman related to the Goodman of Schwerner, Cheney and Goodman, who was executed in Mississippi burning? I think so. Anyway, she is. It just doesn't, to digress for a moment, Amy Goodman is the most disgusting liberal. I mean, what she cares about in the refugees from this war are, of course, are the black people and the Syrians who couldn't get in the first place when Lukashenko tried to send them into Poland. That's what she cares about. Right? I wonder what you would think about sending them back to their home in Africa. I don't know. But anyway, it's perverse that's what this lady cares about. And it's typical of her. She hates white people so much. And it's obvious, and that tells you something about Timothy Snyder, that he would appear on Democracy Now! To make this statement that I'm about to read. Timothy Snyder, a leading scholarly proponent of the liberal democratic expansionist enterprise, similar as Joel Kotkin or Stephen Kotkin. Yale historian Timothy Snyder has put forth a unique suggestion in order to try to worm his way out of a box that he painted himself into from his liberal position. He made what is an astute claim that Putin's rhetoric, i.e. that Ukraine is not a real nation, is the rhetoric of that precedes genocide. Okay, that's true. You know, the Nazis wanted to say that, you know, Poland wasn't a legitimate nation, that Czech and Slovakia weren't real nations. That's the strategy of an imperialist warmongering nation that wants to wipe out somebody by saying, well, they're not real to begin with. And Putin is doing that and saying that the Russians and the Ukrainians are the same thing, the same people. And apparently he miscalculated in expecting a bit too much that they were going to act that way. But that's besides the point. They aren't acting like they're exactly the same people. And they're not exactly the same. They are a different people, a different nation. But Timothy Snyder is making a good point that Putin, in saying that that this is a false difference, is what you would say when you want to basically wipe out a nation. Now then, in forefronting that idea, Timothy Snyder has made a problem for himself, hasn't he? Okay, so you're saying that Ukraine is a real nation, right? He's confronted the fact that liberals like himself have been saying that the white race, that is to say European diaspora, is not real, and that, but he says explicitly that, and that ethno-nationalism is not, and that ethno-nationalism is not a real state of affairs in European nations. But these aren't nations largely based on genetic groupings and distinctions. In denying that, he's putting himself in the position of the genocidal, right? And he must feel that. So what he does is render the unique idea, and I've never heard anybody say this, that ethno-nationalism is about language. I've never had anybody say that. Has anyone ever said that ethno-nationalism is about language except for Timothy Snyder? Or does everybody pretty much assume, quite rightly, that it's about biology and genetic difference? Now they want to say, okay, and then they'll go into it's about supremacism. No, it's not. They're going to call us supremacist. That supremacist. It's not about supremacism. It's not about killing people. It's about maintaining our species. It's about homeostasis. It's about human ecology. And once it's accounted for, it can then, and it's secure, it's in position to coordinate with other species and human ecologies, and so on. But I just thought that's interesting that Timothy Snyder had to come up with that little thing about, in order to get himself out of the box that he painted into, because he was putting himself, along with liberals, and saying that whites don't exist as a meaningful distinction. we know that we're talking about white. We'll use the word white. That means Europeans outside of Europe, because it's awkward to call them Europeans there. European peoples, the genus outside of Europe. And then you can articulate the kinds of European within European nations. Anyway, so these are the great experts commenting on. These are the great experts commenting on the Ukrainian situation, right, and the implications to be drawn. And they're, Mearsheimer is, of course, blaming the United States. This is what they want to do. They want to blame America, not the Project for New American Century people, Victoria Nuland, her husband Robert Kagan, who actually was one of the authors of Operation Clean Break. Victoria Nuland, who went into Ukraine and started, said, fuck the EU. They're not going to decide who's going to be in power here. I'm here to decide who gets in. So cynical was she to make that happen, that she would even work with literal neo-Nazis to engage with the Russians in the eastern province, to antagonize them and to engage in battle with them. Apparently, so it in some sense, when Putin is concerned about Nazism, it's not entirely. He's not entirely pulling that out of his hat. But Victoria Nuland and the Project for New American Century people are so Machiavellian, so jaded, that they would even exploit these people. That's what I tell them. That's what I say about right wingers. Your rigidity is going to get you maneuvered, and has. Now, okay, so they're fighting. So Kagan's wife, Victoria Nuland's got the people engaged in the east of Ukraine. Thousands killed there, provoking the situation, right? Zelensky apparently thinks this is okay too. I don't know. Now, I've heard it said, I don't know if Robert Kagan's forebear was actually Lazar Kaganovich, one of the key figures in the Holodomor, which killed millions of Ukrainians. Of course, Stalin had a little bit to do with that too. It's not strictly not entirely kosher affair, but the Marxist enterprise certainly was, and its disregard for ethno-nationalism and anything but perhaps a step in a process towards the European state. But anyway. Casualties being what they may, it'd be interesting if Robert Kagan was actually, well, I guess genetically could say what it did, Lazar Kaganovich, which actually cleared that area out of native Ukrainians and then gave way to the Russian population that's there now. I just want to mention that before anybody gets too self-righteous about the fact, well, Russians are there in these areas. Well, yeah, but does not mean it's not rightfully Ukraine. Not necessarily. Okay. So the next thing that we want to mention, what's his name? That Greek guy, that half Greek, half German guy, put up a good video of the Christians, the Paleocons, Nick Fuentes, and was it Lauren Witzke, saying how great Putin was. Well, they're not. I mean, these are from months, if not years ago, but still, oh yeah, Putin's doing right by Jesus. He's not going to let the trannies take over the world. And then there's these, you have people like, I assume the Orthodox nationalist has been like, he's so big on Russia. I think that he's been an apologist for Putin. Anyway, most, certainly Rams Paul has been quick to say anything that looks askance at Putin and Russia. Oh, this is what they want to say. Oh, Russiagate, blah, blah, blah. Like it's complete fabrication. He's basically okay or not that bad because he's a nominal Christian, Orthodox Christian, because America's bad, therefore Putin must be somehow not so bad. And all these white nationalists, I think Heimbach was, a lot of people have been very apologetic, if not outright seeing Putin as, the man for white people. Heimbach. So I don't want to catalog the names because I don't know where they stand on him exactly then and now. But you've heard a lot of this, of based Putin, and I know that Andrew Anglin was doing that for a while. But anyway, my good colleague Kumiko brought up a document that was brought forth to the United Nations General Assembly by Putin's Russia, the Russian Federation, unquote, which had as stated 4th November 2014, and it had co-signers Belarus, Benin, Bolivia, Burkina Faso, Cuba, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and it's North Korea, Equatorial Guinea, Kyrgyzstan, Namibia, Nicaragua, Nigeria, Pakistan, Syria, Arab Republic, Turkmenistan, United Republic of Tanzania and Venezuela, Bolivarian Republic. But obviously, the, the biggest proponent here, the powerful force, is the Russian Republic. In other words, Putin. And the title of the document is Combating Glorification of Nazism and Other Practices That Contribute to Fueling Contemporary Forms of Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance. And this is the guy that WN want to treat as based, right? Let me read this document because it's quite short. We also reaffirm that, as underlined in paragraph 13 of the outcome document of the Durban Review Conference, any advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination. Incitement to discrimination, don't have eyeballs, right? Hostility or violence should be prohibited by law, that all dissemination of ideas based on racial superiority or hatred or incitement to racial discrimination, as well as all acts of violence and incitement to such acts, shall be declared offenses punishable by law in accordance with the international obligations of states, and that these prohibitions are consistent with freedom of opinion and expression. 31. Recognizes the positive role that the exercise of the right to freedom of opinion and expression, as well as full respect for the freedom to seek, receive, and impart information, including through the internet, can play in combating racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. 32. Expresses concern about the use of the internet to propagate racism, racial hatred, xenophobia, racial discrimination, and related intolerance, and in this regard calls upon states parties to the covenant to implement fully Articles 19 and 20 thereof, which guarantee the right to freedom of expression and outline the grounds on which the exercise of this right can be legitimately restricted. Recognizes the need to promote the use of new information and communication technologies, including the internet, to contribute to the fight against racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. Also recognizes the positive role that media can play in combating racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, promoting a culture of tolerance and representing the diversity of multicultural society. 35. Encourages states to use all opportunities, including those provided by the internet and social media, to counter the dissemination of ideas based on racial superiority or hatred, and to promote the values of equality, non-discrimination, diversity, and democracy. Thus saith Vladimir Putin. Okay. So in other words, he's denying the validity of a nation's existence. He's preparing for genocide. I have a picture here on my website of Victoria Nuland with opposition leader Ole Tehanibak, head of Svoboda. Okay, so let's look back. Where are we? How are we doing here? Putin, as everybody knows, is was a KGB man. He even said, once a KGB man, always a KGB man. And he's famous also for saying that the fall of the Soviet Union was the greatest catastrophe in the 20th century. And I've got a picture of him here next to his hammer and sickle and with his legions of Soviet tanks in their red parade. May Day parade, I guess. Now, someone like Keith Preston's always trying to take advantage of anything that I say. He's trying to, oh well, Putin. He's not a Soviet. Well, I'm not saying he's exactly a Soviet, but he's obviously nostalgic for aspects of the Soviet Union. Clearly, he wants its buffer states and its imperialism. Preston's acknowledging what I say, that Putin and Russia is an imperialist. It's an imperialist kleptocracy, and that's the point. It's not. This is not ethno-nationalism that Putin's doing, and it's not. And clearly, it's not in the interests of, not strictly in the interests of European peoples, is it? Well, I don't think that he cares a whole lot about the people of Europe. He was dismayed, as everybody knows, with the fall of the Soviet Union. This had been into a great crisis. People didn't care. And then he saw the oligarchs, most of them kosher, pilfering the natural resources and privatizing it to their own interests of Russia. And again, now, before I see people saying that I'm putting blame singularly on the kosher folks, that's not what this platform does, because that's not correct. They are, as the hypothesis here is that they are the best organized. They are the ones who largely set the agendas, grease the palms, and take the initiatives. But they're a relatively small group, and they require those who will take that payoff, whether it's cash or licentiousness in the case of liberals. License. I like the word. I like the way licentiousness goes along with license. Basically, license to transgress borders and bounds. I maintain that that's the clearest, most concise definition of liberalism. So on the DNA Nations, I go through some of the oligarchs that have been in cahoots with Putin since he took over from Yeltsin. Maybe wasn't a particularly bad man, an honest man, but a drunk and a naive man. But Abramovich, who's come into the news in England for he's selling Chelsea now, he was one of the ones who advocated that Putin be the one to take over from Yeltsin. And he is certainly kosher. But then and he's certainly an advocate of Israel. So they're maintaining that organization for his tribe. But there are non-kosher folks here. There's Putin's friend Gennady Timchenko. He founded the investment group Volga Group. Founder of Gunvor, which would go on to export billions of dollars worth of Russian oil. He's a close friend of Vladimir Putin since the early 1990s. He serves on the board of trustees of the Jewish Museum of Tolerance Center in Moscow. Vladimir Potanin, another oligarch, acquired his wealth through the controversial loans for shares program in Russia in the early 1990s. As of March 2022, he was the wealthiest man in Russia and the 58th richest person in the world, with an estimated net of $24.4 billion, according to Bloomberg Billionaires Index. Okay. So Russia bowed in 1998. Russia bowed to the rule of 7 bankers. This is around the time when Yeltsin's giving away. And after the election of these 7 bankers, according to several sources, the tycoons met and decided to insert one of their own into government. They debated who and chose Potanin, who became deputy prime minister. One reason they chose Potanin was that he is not Jewish, and most of the rest of them are, and feared backlash against the Jewish bankers. The next oligarch, Igor Ivanovich, the de facto deputy of Vladimir Putin. Deputy Prime Minister of Russia in Vladimir Putin's cabinet from 2008 to 2012. He's currently Chief Executive Officer, President, and Chairman of Management Board of Rosneft. Rosneft has played a major role in the history of Russia's oil industry. The first use of the name Rosneft dates back to the late 19th century, when exploration of oil fields in Sakhalin began in 1889. Most of Rosneft's current assets were established during the Soviet era. Now that becomes important because that's a major conflict, an imperialist conflict, part of the kleptocracy in the East, in Asia. The Sakhalin Island is really what should be the northernmost island of Japan. This is the natives there are, let's just say they're not Russian. And the thing is, natural gas has been discovered there, which Japan needs desperately. I mean, they've had to resort to Fukushima, right? And we saw what happened there. But from the American side, Rex Tillerson, this is before the days of his being made Secretary of State for Donald Trump. The CEO of Exxon, he talked about, taking the payoff, became very chummy with Putin, and was willing to deploy Exxon's expertise to drill up that oil and natural gas from Sakhalin. And not only that, but to launder Putin's money for him in the Bahamas. There's a document here that expresses that. Of this shell company that Tillerson set up. So Tillerson was he was okay, right? And then it was okay with Trump until Tillerson might have been a bit of a capitalist pig and deceptive and dishonest, but not completely immoral, and noted that when this incident happened in England of KGB or FSB, whatever they're called now, poisoned some people in England, and Tillerson said something about it, that coincided with Tillerson's being dismissed by Trump and gave him away to Pompeo. But anyway, this I just wanted to, it's a bit of a digression, but not entirely. I believe this Sakhalin Island could become a bargaining chip, but it's got, with Putin raising the specter of nuclear war, you have to be really careful how these things are handled. It can't be too belligerent. I like the idea of perhaps floating to the guy that's going to replace Putin one day, whoever that is, buying these places, the Japan, Korea, and China, buy some of these places, and the islands and some parts of Eastern Asia, and part of the agreement be that they help to improve Russia's manufacturing base, so they're not just extracting, as this imperial kleptocracy bit is done away with, and they turn into a true ethno state relying on manufacturing, not just resource extraction and sale. Igor Shuvalov, another Goyim, Russian Goyim oligarch, is more in the political scene, but he's one who's trying to maintain the control and the development of these eastern parts. In fact, that I think that are not really, as an ethno-nationalist, they are not really rightfully Russian. I don't think that anything east of Lake Baikal is rightfully Russian. and that even west of Lake Baikal, you're talking about what will be the hugest ethno state in the world. So they shouldn't complain. But again, you have to be careful about these things. You're talking about obviously enormous money, and crazy people with nuclear weapons. I think they said that Russia's got 600 of them. America's got 500. Again, and that's a reason why not to go along with Zelensky's pugnacious stance and allow things to escalate. If they want to install a puppet like Lukashenko for a time in Ukraine, good luck to them. And furthermore, with all the money that they have and their wish to be seen as the good guys, what they do, if you go to, I've been to Belarus several times. You go there, and if you wouldn't know, if you don't step out of line, it's fairly pleasant. Even the main street of Minsk, it's got all these fancy bars and restaurants and beautiful, clean parks. Happy couples walking around, and it's a homogeneous population, which is great for us. So it's not all that bad. I mean, it's you can endure it. Aside from the indignation and the peril of having to put up with someone like Lukashenko, and the fact that he has committed crimes and brutal suppression for those who really in legitimate essence are looking for Belarusian autonomy in the case of that nation, and who have very legitimate gripes with Russia and Russian oppression historically, and reason to not want that to remain indefinitely. Although, I've talked to Belarusian patriots who, for all their hatred of and that hatred, unfortunately, is not too strong of a word. For all their hatred of Russia for what Russia has done to Belarus and Belarusians, again, murdering in the millions. For all the suppression of Belarusian culture, language, distinction, they recognize that this guy has been to America now. He's been to Western Europe, and what's happening there is something that has caused them to do an about face and say, okay, let Lukashenko stay in there for a while. Let this neo Iron Curtain remain for a while. If you could just get rid of Lukashenko and have someone there who's like a bona fide Belarusian nationalist, we survive as a people. And this is what I'm trying to. This is the big lesson for Ukrainian people. That's the strategy, because just fighting directly, it's only going to increase the destruction. Whereas if you take a long approach and go for the win over the long haul, It's going to be less destruction, fewer deaths, less destruction, and you can survive as a people. And especially now, I mean, because it's going to be didactic that the world is seeing that Ukrainians see themselves as different as an ethno nation. They're going to see the they're going to see the phoniness of the imposed regime. So there's calls for optimism in that approach. Now, I put up some quotes on this article that I've added to my site from Dugin, and I was surprised. I didn't know that Dugin was that bad. And again, people try to take advantage of anything they can against me and say, "Oh, Dugin is not." Oh, WN, they exaggerate how influenced Dugin is. I'm not. I don't. I know that he's been not a part of the of Putin's inner circle for a while, and maybe never was all that big of an influence. But he's a known figure, and a Russian nationalist of sorts who, in the Putin non-racial way, the Orthodox, I guess the Orthodox Christian way. And just the bigotry that he has towards the Ukrainians was surprising me. I that he would feel this, and I would imagine that others would share his sentiments. He said this when he was on delegation to Greece one time. Today, he said, Dugin said, "Today's Ukrainians are a race of degenerates that crawled up from sewage. Genocide is in order." Such a quaint-sounding man, or looking man. And he took a similar revenge towards the Kurds. He said, "Sooner or later, the endless spectacle is over. Then we will take revenge mercilessly." And there he is with a rocket launcher. Now, it's talking about Kurdish nationalism, ethno-nationalism, which is an interesting analogy to white nationalism, because they are, like white nationalists, they are a people without an official nation, without an actual concrete nation. And this is what. And their difference is something that Dugin would destroy, apparently. But no, I'm not looking to make Dugin into that big of a deal, and never. I definitely don't think much of him. Klaus Schwab, he has officially sided with the Ukrainians, again, like Kotkin and others, are, I guess, not minding to escalate the war because, well, that's good news for the arms industry, right? Dealers in death, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, BAE, all partners of the World Economic Forum of Klaus Schwab, and is he related? I think he's in cahoots with Fink, Larry Fink from the Black Rock. Nevertheless, Putin refers to Klaus Schwab as "Dear Klaus." That's one thing that Russia can manufacture, right? Arms. And then you have Putin is quite chummy with with Bennett, Premier of Israel. We went to visit him today, right? He's playing both sides, not surprisingly. Ugh. Putin's cahoots with Shabbat Lubavitch, and even though Keith Woods wants to treat that as a joke, they show pictures of Putin with Shabbat Lubavitch. Well, Shabbat Lubavitch has been empowered by Putin, and they are forced to be reckoned with in Russia, in connection with Israel, and in connection with diaspora, like their contingent in Brooklyn. Rabbi Lazar. Lazar belongs to the Orthodox Lubavitch Hasidic movement, or Chabad headquarters in Brooklyn, New York. He had been sent, along with several dozen other adherents, to establish Hasidic communities all over the former Soviet Union. It was the Jewish equivalent of the missionary movement. By coincidence, one of Putin's favorite oligarchs, Roman Abramovich, who we mentioned before, that guy who just sold Chelsea, attended Lubavitch services and provided financial support to Rabbi Lazar's movement. Thus, Abramovich may have inspired the strategy of the challenge to Gusinski. Abramovich was also allied with Lev Levayev, a one-time official in the Russian Jewish Congress, who was a major supporter of the Lubavitch Hasidic movement in Israel and Russia, and a man eager to win favor with President Putin. Levayev became the president of the new umbrella group, which, instead of the Russian Jewish Congress, they called Federation of Jewish Communities in the Commonwealth of Independent States. An Israeli citizen born in Uzbekistan, Levayev was a controversial diamond dealer who has allegedly used his access to President Putin to encroach on De Beers' exclusive rights to Russian diamonds. He has also been involved with the one-time aluminum oligarch Mikhail Chernoy, accused by the Israeli police of being deeply involved with the Russian underworld, and international money laundering charges denied by Chernoy. On June 13, 2000, 2 weeks after becoming a citizen and a day after meeting in the Kremlin with Putin, Lazar convened a meeting of his fellow Hasidic rabbi emissaries from 45 Russian regions. They voted unanimously to make Rabbi Lazar the chief rabbi of Russia. This was somewhat awkward since there had already been an existing chief rabbi, Adolf Sheyevich, who was recognized by the Russian Jewish Congress. Undeterred, the Russian government immediately decreed Lazar's Federation of Jewish Communities of Russia the official representative of Russian Jews, thereby superseding Gusinski's Congress. Another oligarch, Arkady Rottenberg, is of Jewish ancestry. He was born in 1951 in Leningrad, where his father, Roman, worked in management at the Red Dawn telephone factory, allowing the family to avoid living in a communal apartment. In 1963, when he was age 12, Rottenberg and Vladimir Putin both joined Anatoly Rakin's Sambo Club. Boris Romanovich Rottenberg, that's his brother, was born the 3rd of January 1957. He's a Russian-born businessman. They're not calling him Jewish, but he is, obviously, if his brother was, right? And oligarch. He is owner, with his brother Arkady Rottenberg, of SGM, Story Gas Montage Group, the largest construction company for gas pipelines and electrical power supply in Russia. He was listed by Forbes as Russia's 69th wealthiest person in 2016, with a net worth of $1.7 billion. He is considered a close confidant of Vladimir Putin. Mikhail Friedman, born 21 April 1964, is a Ukrainian-born Russian oligarch. He also holds Israeli citizenship. He founded Alpha Group, a multinational Russian conglomerate. According to Forbes, he was the seventh richest Russian as of 2017. In May 2017, he was also ranked as Russia's most important businessman by the Intelligence. In 1991, he founded Alpha Bank, which is one of the largest private banks in Russia. After serving as CEO in TNK BP, a joint venture for 9 years, in 2013, he sold his stake in the company and co-founded the international investment company, Letter One. Headquartered in Luxembourg, Friedman currently sits as chairman of the supervisory board of Alpha Group Consortium, and he is also on the boards of Alpha Bank and ABH Holdings, which is the Luxembourg-based holding company of Alpha Bank Group. In May 2018, Friedman and Avon spoke to an off-the-record private dinner meeting at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C. The invitation and privacy of the meeting drew criticism of the Atlantic Council from a group of 13 Russian and U.S. experts and activists who wrote that, in our view, Avon, Friedman, and other key Alpha Bank oligarchs are close cronies and insiders of Putin's regime and do not operate independently of Putin's demands. And then there's Usmanov, who was a Muslim married to a Jewish woman, Irina Wiener, a rhythmic gymnast coach. In 1992, Wiener is considered that is Usmanov's, this oligarch's wife, this Jewish lady, is considered to be close to Putin, having introduced him to Alina Kabayeva, this pretty Uzbek lady or something that Putin screws around with. So that's another oligarch, Usmanov. And then there's Putin's son-in-law. My God. This guy's, he's, this, does he look like the Happy Merchant? It makes the Happy Merchant look handsome. This married to Putin's daughter. His name is Kirill Shemelov, director and part owner of Sibir, one of Russia's largest gas processing and petrochemical companies. So you have in this something similar as Trump with his daughter and son being married into the tribe, and that seems to be a strategy that the tribe marries into Goy power. I've already talked about Kotkin there, and there's Putin and his good friend Benjamin Netanyahu, and again Putin and Lukashenko. And then I don't want to sound like I am letting off the quote Americans, letting them off the hook. Again, I want to come back to Biden and his son most graphically. But this is a battle between that's orchestrated by the koshers and the goyim sellouts, neocons and liberals on both sides. And we've got to wrest at their national sovereignty from that fight, and can do that. But it's important to note that the corrupt kosher folks can't succeed without complicity from these right wingers and these neoliberals or plain liberals. Tulsi Gabbard called attention to the corruption of Zelensky, which is good of her. She's not all bad. She sees a corrupt war brewing, and so she's consonant with what I'm saying is don't let Zelensky drag us into war, and don't fight a hot war unless you're willing to sacrifice yourself. Don't I wouldn't even recommend exactly a guerrilla war. I would say fight a war, an indirect war, a long haul war. And there's Zelensky, who was largely put into power through the auspices of Ihor, the very kosher Ihor Kolomorsky, another oligarch. Before that was Poroshenko, and he was, corrupt of the Western sort. I think he came in after the Maidan, which is total fake CIA op. That is to say, the Operation Clean Break, Victoria Nuland using the CIA op to get rid of the Russian stooge, which was Yanukovych. They're bad people on both sides. But the Maidan, this was completely fake. It was pretty obvious to me. Again, and it couldn't be more obvious. You don't hear people talking about Ukraine being a part of Operation Clean Break. That's usually they talk about. They talk about Iraq, and they hope Iran. The nations right around Israel, but it seems pretty clear to me that Ukraine comes under that umbrella as well. Regime change friendly to the kosher folks. Then going back some, you have the Orange Revolution, when there was I discussed this last time, when the West put up this guy Viktor Yushchenko. This was the time when they began, proposing that Ukraine join NATO and the EU, which of course I agree with those who say that's not something that should be done. I might have my reasons for not wanting to be in for their sake, not to turn Kiev into Paris. Thank you very much. But Yushchenko, there was a rigged election, and Yushchenko not only lost, they poisoned him with dioxin, and he didn't die from it, but he became like his monster face for a while. Soros, seeing an opportunity to impose or bring liberal democracy, Kotkin style, Mearsheimer style, to Ukraine, did this Orange Revolution thing, which did undo the elections, the false elections that had Yanukovych temporarily there, and have Yushchenko be the West's man, the West man for a while, and their corrupt, Hunter Biden-esque thing to do. Eventually, Russia was able to turn it around and get Yanukovych in after all, from 2010 to 2013, until Victoria Nuland said, okay, we're coming in, we're going to do the Maidan uprising. Again, they take the initiatives because European peoples, not in my memory, don't take that kind of initiative. And so they did that, and then again, they had Poroshenko in there for a while until Zelensky, until they could finally get their real kosher man in there, which they have now. So they can have their they can have their war, and war, it's been said, is a kosher harvest. Okay. Have we I think we've covered basically everything. I just want to reemphasize that the main point that I want to bring home is this meme that I got through my Twitter thread. It says, if Russia stops fighting, there will be no war. This pretty Ukrainian girl holding up the sign. And then it says, if Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no more Ukraine. Now, I want to say that I'm 100% against that. Taking a step back from that, having to endure a puppet regime such as Putin has already installed in Belarus with Lukashenko, even if brutal for those who would outrightly oppose it, does not mean the end of ethno-nationalism, not the end of Ukrainian nationalism. They can survive, even, not necessarily all that bad away for a time until they can wrest their true ethno-nationalism from that situation, especially with the support that they'll have from around the world. The key is to not allow it to bleed into be taken over by liberalism, which really doesn't care about ethno-nationalism. That's why I'm so concerned to note where Timothy Snyder, Kotkin, and Mearsheimer are coming from before people are genuflect to these guys, because they don't care about ethno-nationalism. All right. So, look back. Hey, this Mengele guy, I'm going to have to, I should kick you from my chat. All right, I'm going to I'll put the link in if anybody wants to join me. I had to say these things. There. Okay. Blessings from Elliot Blatt. Zero Hedge was here. Claire was here. I don't know why my... okay, so I read some things, but that doesn't mean that you, dear listener, should abandon, because you need to hear this stuff. But for your sake, I'll leave the stream up so that you can refer back to it, because you need to hear this, even if you don't think so. Ooh, my back was in a weird position. Okay. Anybody want to join? I'll hang on for another 10, 15 minutes if anybody wants to join in. It shouldn't be too bad of a time. It's not really late. Well, maybe it's Saturday night. Just, a lot of people want to go out. I can understand that. But those don't. It's not a bad hour. It's 12:55 in London. It's 7:55. Just about 6:55. Just about 7 in New York. So it's a good hour in Chicago too. 6:55. We're in Ukraine. That's all right, Mark Barron. We don't have to chat today. I chat, but I'm too tired to be on it. Yeah, that's fine. Mark Barron says, I support Ukraine as a nation, yep, and its people, but Zelensky regime is another quisling regime, in my opinion. Yeah. I'm not overly familiar with this term quisling, but Zelensky is, this guy doesn't belong as the head of state. He's been put in there for kosher interests, and he's doing an evil thing and calling upon these people to take up arms and fight, this this Russian military. I'm not saying that you should be, a pacifist about it and completely effeminate about it. And again, those guys who who are willing to sacrifice their lives, okay, go for it. Don't, but he's making for a bloodbath that's not gonna lead anywhere, but not likely to lead anywhere but vast destruction, when the same ends could be achieved ultimately without so much destruction and carnage. If he were to step down. And not only is Ukraine going to be destroyed, it's not only its cities going to be destroyed with this kind of oppositional approach, the fighting, and a lot of people going to die. But the whole world could be dragged into it if they go along with Zelensky, which fortunately they're not stupid enough to do. It could even trigger a nuclear war. Putin, that's why you have to be careful. Putin could say, oh yeah, you're going to, Poland is going to supply planes to Ukraine, are you? Well, let's see if the world is willing to start a full-scale nuclear war for the sake of Poznan. Let me send a nuclear bomb into Poznan and see if you'll retaliate with a nuclear bomb into Russia, because then I'll retaliate in turn, and so on. Or just pick some city to destroy as an example, and play nuclear brinksmanship. What's scary, it's scary too, is that he could. That's why when I started thinking about Japan, I was like, Yeah, let's get Japan involved because they have a long history of animus with Russia. You know, go back to 1905 when they defeated the Russians, um, and there's still a hatred there to this day, especially given Sakhalin. And I was thinking like, oh, Russia could say, well, the United States did it. Why can't we send a nuclear bomb there? Uh, that's why I don't want to be really belligerent about this. Um, Putin says he's concerned about his security. Well, he would be more secure if he wasn't antagonizing his neighbors and would move into a modality of cooperation and help. The Japanese can help, and they can provide a lot of money by the purchase of these islands, by investment and help in installing the robotics and manufacturing infrastructure into Russia. Um, there'll be there could be ways to foster goodwill from Ukraine and from Belarus that would not require not require them to take a militaristic stance where these nations wouldn't want to attack Russia or to be a conduit for the attack on Russia. But we do have to beware of the neoliberal goals, the radically liberal goals of Koch and Mearsheimer, of Timothy Snyder, because that can lead to destruction either by itself or in reaction, in right-wing reaction. Ethno-nationalism proper is not right-wing. It's left ethno-nationalism. The basis is in a union of the people, not some abstract beyond nature or within nature, beyond accountability and correctivity in praxis. Now, one more topic that I need to address while I'm at this, and that is Sam Dixon, a lawyer and a longtime friend of white nationalists. I tend to like him. He, like just about everybody involved in that perspective, is on the intelligent side, of course, and has many good things to say, and is mistaken in some ways. Him a bit less than others. He's better than most. He's not. He's a bit more thoughtful than most, but he said something. He said something in his discussion with was it Bill Johnson and Charles Lincoln. Bill Johnson's another matter. Don't get into that. He's one of these Nordicist snobs. I mean, real bad. But anyway, Sam Dixon said DNA is not enough to organize people. Now, this seems to be a direct contestation of my DNA Nations program, which he would know about because I've discussed it with McDonald and I've discussed it with Tom Sunick and others. So well, it's not enough. There's got to be more than DNA. And what I propose is a gathering, a unification of all those who identified under the Nicene Creed of in 1490 something. That's like what? The Nicene Creed is something like you're pledging allegiance to Jesus Christ or something, and where this is the old idea of the litmus test to say that you're, before the days of genetics, this was the usual way of saying not Jewish. You say you're Christian, right? Well, first of all, there were, even at that, there's a lot of conversos, not just forced, but people who were like kosher folks who recognized that it's best that they could make their life easier by just saying, okay, I'm a Christian. So you're not even necessarily guaranteeing Europeanness on the ground. Yeah, I said David Yeagley, Earth Baron. You don't remember that I said that. I know that he's the native Indian guy. He was good. But coming back to Sam Dixon, this idea that the Nicene Creed should provide the unifying culture, that's ridiculous. Now he goes a step further, and he tries to say something which might seem interesting, but isn't exactly. He's suggesting that those who aren't, him and Charles Lincoln are he's suggesting that those who aren't repulsed by the idea are manifesting themselves as European in nature, and those who are not are suspect. Now then, there's a modicum of truth. Like he used the example of the Sistine Chapel. If you're not repulsed by the Sistine Chapel, blah blah blah, then you are of a European nature. Now, there is some truth to that. That I've always maintained that that's a difference between me as someone who opposes Christianity as a terrible bum steer, a red cape, a false opposition, a usurpation of a moral order. It's horrible. But I am not like, I don't react to it like the way the kosher folks do, some of them anyway, with just anger and revulsion and this and that. And I don't hate the people who are trying it. I understand that they're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to usually they're trying to invoke a moral order. Sometimes they're disingenuous and doing bureaucratic stuff like Matt Parrott, but usually they're trying to do the right thing. And I'm not going to be repulsed by a church. I'm going to admire the architecture, not as Christian, but as European. The artwork and the art and the sculpture, not as Christian, but as European. Now, the subject matter, I do find offensive. You have a kosher guy on, there on a crucifix that was supposed to, just like the worship. Yeah, that's offensive. But even at that, I'm not shrieking and hollering. I'm just like observing that. No, this is not good. This is not for me. And so for Sam Dixon and Charles Lincoln and Bill Johnson to put that yoke and that misdirection back onto the heads of European peoples, no, I'm not going to go for it. I'm not. He wants to make that a litmus test. He can for his particular province, let's say, of the ethno state. But don't make that a litmus test for me. And here's the more important point. Don't, I'm not saying that DNA is everything and does everything by itself. That's where the whole aspect of hermeneutics comes into play. Hermeneutics, which can misdirect and mislead people into systemic runaway, or can facilitate systemic homeostasis if it's well done hermeneutics. But that's where the realm of religiosity would interplay, and that's where unifying narrative concepts. So no, I'm not saying that DNA is enough, but DNA certainly it provides the ultimate, near ultimate barium, the near ultimate decisive factor, at least of who is not a European. So I don't know how much the likes of Sam Dixon have been an obstruction to the DNA Nations project, but it's tragic that they've gotten him, whoever it is that's been in the way. So I know that Matt Parrott was opposed to it. Kevin McDonald liked the idea originally. I don't know who dissuaded him from it, but it seems, he should be more help than he is. Tom Sunik liked it for a time. He went along with McDonald saying, "Oh, well, I'm not a good organizer." I don't know why. It really doesn't make good sense. But I think that the Christians have been a large part of the problem in obstructing the DNA Nations project, and that's not right. And Sam Dixon seems to be going along with that, and he talks about his good friend from the political cesspool. What's his name? Who's the guy from the political cesspool? Not Keith. Keith Alexander is a Christian too. It's amazing how intelligent these Christians can be with just stupid religions. Richard Edwards. Edwards. Yeah, well, I can't. I'm sorry, I can't. I can't fake that. I believe that stuff, and I can't recommend doing that to kids. I can't do that to my children. But what I would say to Sam Dixon though is that the DNA Nations is not. I'm not going to say that people who are Christians who maintain Christianity are not. I can't say that they don't have European genetics if they have European genetics. What I would say is in my part of the ethno state, it's like that's not going to be the official religion. It's not going to be something that, and it's going to be something that is, in fact, denounced as destructive to our biology, to our species, by definition. Read the texts. It's a kosher trick. It's a red cape. It's false opposition. Sorry. I won't countenance it. I believe in morality. I believe in a moral order. And I don't think that Christianity suffices. All right. So I'll put the link in one more time. Otherwise, I'm going to close up shop. This has been a good show. I don't care that if I don't have listeners. I don't, I'm fully confident in the premises that are being set forth here. Muscular Christianity will save Europeans. I don't agree. I mean, Christianity has historically been used in a you could say in a muscular sense, but this was in the 1600s when they were fighting off the Turkish invasion of Vienna. How many people even knew what was in the texts? They just kind of felt these things out and what does it mean to be good, and they might have a few lines from the texts, and they did not. And Europe was mostly. European people anyway, for the most part, except for Jews, and here were the Muslims who were, saying that your religion is no good. To fight them was a fairly obvious thing, but this is not the situation now. I don't think that muscular Christianity is going to. It might do a little part, but how can you tell people to believe in this stuff? Once you see it for what it is, how can you undo that? You can't. Oh, it's a term that has cropped up in YouTube comment and was curious about it. Yeah. Oh, you're joking. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I should have known. Sorry about that, Rick. I just I'm too used to dealing with Christians and other nonsensical people. Muscular Christian. Well, Michelangelo's his figures are pretty muscular there up in the Sistine Chapel. Now, I do recoil when I go into the Sistine Chapel, but not for the reason that Sam Dixon says, not for the non-European reason. I recoil exactly for the European reason. I think I don't want to blame the Japanese, the Sony Corporation, but they were in charge of cleaning the ceiling, and they removed what amounts to a layer of, kind of visual sculpting, shading of the figures, and left only these really vulgar colors that were beneath, and basically ruined it. That's what's offensive to me about the Sistine Chapel. But, and also another problem was that he didn't have enough perspective, and so some of the figures are not in good proportion. He was a sculptor. Michelangelo was a sculptor, not so much a painter. He's a good painter, a really good painter too. But once you see the Pietà, that's his highest art, of course, by far. And David. Don't get me started on this sculptor. They're great. Okay. For anybody just joining now, I recommend that you start back with the beginning of this stream and listen to it, because this is very important. We've got to call upon the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian nationalists, to take a step back, to not follow Zelensky's advice, or not follow his call to take up arms and fight to the death. It's going to lead to destruction and of the cities and deaths, men, women, and children, possibly dragging the world into this, possibly even escalating to nukes if you follow that path. Whereas if you humor Putin and allow for regime change, you will survive as a people, and you're well positioned to fight the long haul and win the long victory, and really win, not win in the stupid Coach Red Pill sense, but win your national autonomy in the long haul. And Putin's going to look very bad. His puppet is going to look very bad. So you're going to have, the world on your side, and ethno-nationalism will have eminently more backing and clear warrant. It makes me. I'm almost moved to tears when I see, the people, the nationalism of the Ukrainians and the people supporting their nationalism. It's just the most beautiful thing to me when I see a European species in the organic mode of fighting for their survival and their species, their distinction. Again, it's so different from what's been going on in the West for all these decades. Just have to, so beware not to get caught up into the right-wing overcompensating fight. Klitschko, he's, big boxer, stud guy, and he's part kosher too. right along there with Zelensky. Don't get snookered in. Don't be a part of the kosher harvest. So that's one error direction. And then again, they're playing a long game too. As I said, what I saw in Mearsheimer, his fears and hopes, you've seen and Kotkin and Timothy Snyder. That's the other danger. And why it's better to, it's actually not as, it's actually better in a way than Lukashenko, because this whatever puppet that Putin might install is going to be even more didactic, and people are more clear about the reality and in distinction of the Ukrainians than they are about the Belarusians. That they just think that the Belarusians are another shade of Russians. They don't realize that these are a different people. So anyway, so there's cause for optimism, but don't, I say, unless you are just like, there should be fighting. Don't get me wrong. There should be fighting for Ukrainian nationalism. And I'd say up to including perhaps, some guys who are willing to, fight to the death. But, then those are just gung-ho individuals expressing that. But that should not be the main thrust. The main thrust should be a long haul strategy, and not taking up arms. Who's AB? Hello?
Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to Tyrone.
Okay. So, with Tyrone, having said his thing, we will. I think that's enough for a show. This is an important show, and important to remember: we're not supremacists, we're not imperialists, we're not looking to. We're not. It's not our goal to kill people, let alone to genocide people, not even to exploit them. We can barter and negotiate for whatever resources that we might not have in our own ethno-nation. And cheers, Daniel. We'll listen to Once Refreshed. Great, Rosemary. Thank you. And thank you for stopping by, as always. Appreciate it. So, 14 and bye for now.